Okay, it's roundup time. We've got some Stadia schadenfreude. Our AI Overloards are getting a bit stronger. There's a $1.4 million Justice Online character plus a whole bunch more. Of course, we do this show twice a week plus loads more reports, so ring that bell and let's get stuck into the news. Stadia's numbers are in and man, they're really not that good. So, okay, the Stadia mobile app has been downloaded 175,000 times. It's not particularly great for a new launch, but where things actually get interesting and rough is Destiny 2. Now remember, the only version of Stadia that you can get, right, that includes Stadia Pro. That means that Destiny 2 is free for all current Stadia players. Well, here are the numbers for November 25th. PC led the charge with 494k, PS4 had 454k, Xbox had 331k, Stadia 19,400. That's considerably less people, and it is rather bizarre because I think the one game that people will instantly fire up to test out Stadia, I mean, it is Destiny 2. It's the one that every single Stadia player will have. So that game in particular is doing so bad on Stadia, I mean, it really is pretty darn notable. Now, that said, from our experience of playing Destiny 2 on Stadia, I mean, it kind of sucked. It felt like you were a bit drunk. It was sort of okay in the most ideal of circumstances, but look, another 50 milliseconds of input lag, that really ain't pretty, and that really did hit that game pretty hard. And overall here, I think it's pretty clear what's going on, right? Stadia is not the ideal place to play a game like Destiny 2. Now, while Destiny 2 is free for everybody and it does have cross-save, it does not have cross-play. That means that games like Destiny 2 require, they've got quite significant network effect, right? Destiny 2 is better the more friends you have on the platform that you're playing it on. And for something like Stadia, that just basically means that it's going to be in this Ouya-like situation where it's not really going to have enough players to actually get the ball rolling to overall make it something that's successful. So it pretty much seems like that is what's happening, and Google are going to need to do something pretty darn major to recover from this honestly pretty terrible launch. Of course, though, the problems don't just end there. There are more things. So, Chromecast Ultras, they are known to overheat a bit. That is something that's sort of exacerbated by longer gaming sessions with Stadia. This has apparently led to, device shutdowns. Not very good when you're playing a game. Now, Google have responded to this, and they just said there were no issues, just that your Chromecast might get a bit warm to the touch. Now, that's a bit weird, because, the community versus Google, one of them's got to be right here. And while Google says it was internally tested, I mean, users are consistently reporting that they're having a different experience. And this all ties into a bit of a pattern here. Google lying, right? They lied about quality. They said that you're getting a 4K 60 FPS HDR experience. So in that case, why is Destiny 2 1080p upscaled running at medium settings? That's a pretty big lie. Then there was a whole bunch of Stadia features that are not shipping for launch, but they talked up those features during their initial reveal. At the same time, they were driving those Founders Edition pre-orders. Consistently, Google have been evasive. They have not been particularly truthful, and this is just that continuing. It is absolutely no wonder that Google have managed to make themselves, I don't want to say a villain, right, to the average gaming audience, because it's not like they're a villain. I think people don't respect them enough to actually think that. It's just that they're a bit of a self-deserved punching bag. And I don't mean that with a lot of malice, even though it does sound like that, but it's the fact that they came in, they lied, they clearly didn't really understand the audience, and they tried to get away with it, and it's obviously not happening. But that said, there's a final angle to that quality issue. So after being pressed for a response, Google kind of chose to blame devs, right? Their statement reads that Stadia streams at 4K 60 FPS, including all aspects of our graphics pipeline from game to screen, and that Google give developers the freedom of how to best achieve the image quality and frame rate on Stadia. So they say they expect that the quality will improve there in the future, and I do think it will, but they're effectively shifting the blame onto the developers, even though the problem that consumers have is, you said these stats, your product does not actually deliver them. So it's pretty bad. And it's a bit ridiculous because we found the actual Stadia pipeline things, such as its response to, a shaky connection or even its performance under good situations, to be not really as good as xCloud. So Google can't be evasive with this. I think, frankly, they've just got to face the music. They released this thing way too damn early, and they really are facing the consequences. There is then another Stadia Stadia funny, mostly just because it shows quite a substantial level of disorganization over at Google. So what has basically happened is that Stadia Pro in December's, like its 2 new games, are going to be Tomb Raider Definitive Edition and Farming Simulator 2019. Now, those are both games that were available with a Stadia Pro discount for purchase upon launch. Now, Google, of course, because of this, have had to refund people who actually purchased those games on Stadia because, of course, they're now going to be free. Now, that just doesn't make any sense, does it? I mean, if those things were going to be free in December and they were going to be trying to sell them, even though they knew they would just have to refund those sales, why the hell just not have them there at launch? I think overall, it just paints a bit of a picture of disorganization and chaos over at Google. There's just a few things here where you've got to question, like, how much do they know what they're doing? How much of this have they actually got well planned? How much of this is just them scrambling to try to make that Stadia Pro content offer look a little bit better? All right, next up. So remember that Minerva report that we did a few weeks back, right? It was the one about the AI-based moderator that is being trialed in CSGO. Well, it's been updated with a community tool. So if a player is banned, others in the server can review that ban. And that player review is then fed into the machine learning that ideally will make Minerva a bit more accurate in the future. So it's all there in the name of self-improvement. And I think it's pretty interesting. As I've said before, this problem of people being total dickheads in games, right? That is a scale problem. There's no way you can do that with like human reviews. You need like 10,000 people reviewing chat logs, and I think we all think that's a pretty dumb idea. So some sort of system like this is probably the right way to solve that problem if that's what you want to do. However, right, I mean, if somebody gets banned from a server, well, the player reviews from the people in that server, I've got to wonder if they would be just a little bit biased. And if that would then feed some biases into the machine learning, and that if that then would make Minerva a bit less accurate or just, you know, have particular biases. This is a pretty darn common problem when, like, you get into machine learning, like the biases inherent in your data set or elements of your process that you've not necessarily thought about. So this is definitely a developing story. We'll have to see how it actually plays out, but I think it's worth talking about here and sharing that info with you because, being real, you are going to see more things like this crop up in the future, so it's best we understand it early. And then next up, and I guess sort of on the topic of big spooky tech giants, we've got Facebook, who have, I mean, this is just a quick sad story, but they've acquired the Beat Saber developer. Now, that does make sense, right? Facebook own Oculus, they've been pretty major in VR, even though, I mean, I don't think we particularly want Facebook to be too involved in, well, just about anything. But yeah, they've purchased the Beat Saber developer, and just, I want to throw this in because it's made me a little bit sad. I kind of hope they'd be, you know, there'd be a bit more freedom going on, and if this does mean that future Beat Saber content or games from that team are like unique or, you know, are exclusive to the Oculus platform and, you know, aren't on Steam VR, then that would really suck. And it would especially suck because I think a bunch of people are going to get into VR based on Half-Life Alyx, and then they're going to, you know, see really good content from the Beat Saber team who are pretty darn incredible, but not be able to do it because it's on Oculus, which would be just a little bit sad. But yeah, there you go. TLDR, acquisitions sometimes are pretty sad, and I think this is one of those instances. All right, next we've got a real weird story for you. So last week it emerged that a man in China had taken his friend to court for selling his character in the MMO Justice Online. Now, here's the kicker. The claimant had spent $1.4 million on that character. Then his friend sold it for $552 via Netease's marketplace, where it was snapped up by another player. Now, the defendant had argued that he had been given the character to play and had been trying to sell the character back to his friend for the paltry sum of 55 grand. Now, he claimed that that was a typo because he was really dizzy after a long gaming session. Bit of a weird story. Now, the case was settled through mediation, where basically Netease revoked the sale and the plaintiff paid the buyer $12,700 odd in damages. Now, the court stated this is a cautionary tale in protecting your digital assets, and they advised players to be wary of spending large sums in games. You know, sums such as 1.4 million on an MMO character. Now, it's pretty interesting. That is an MMO that is designed such that you can spend that amount of money on one character, which honestly is a little bit crazy. It's something that happens a lot more in that particular market, though. And there's another angle here, and that is the sort of legitimizing of a gray market. So way back in the day, with say Diablo 2 or just a lot of like the older MMOs, you'd have these online marketplaces where you could buy and sell accounts. Now, Blizzard actually tried to do this, right? Blizzard in Diablo 3 tried the auction house. So, you know, you wouldn't be buying and selling items through eBay. No, you'd be doing it through the Blizz auction house, and they'd be getting a cut, you know, transaction fee. NetEase have clearly done that. They've legitimized their gray market. So they've basically made a game that you can sink just stupid amounts of money into, and then they've thought, oh, well, there's a secondary market in this, and then they've tried to take that over, which is fairly interesting. I mean, it's a sane business decision, right? It's pretty vertically integrated in terms of your business model, but it does, I think, reveal just some scummy aspects of game development, and it really does show that some of these things, they are just a big cash-generating machine, which, I mean, from a NetEase MMO, I mean, can we really be surprised? And then next up, a little funny to spice things up. So Battleborn is finally dead. I mean, it's quite a funny story. Battleborn, if you've ever seen this, the Crobcat video, right? The really funny one that I think is the most Battleborn content that's actually been generated that people have, even looked at. But yeah, Battleborn, a Gearbox game. They really talked it up as the next big thing, but people basically saw it, thought it looked like a bit of a discount Overwatch, which in some ways was fair, in some ways a little bit less fair because it was doing some other things, but overall, a big, hubristic, failed game that I think it looked really cheap off the get-go, and I think that is a part of what just made people not really feel like it was an exciting new thing, and that it was just a trend follower, and because of that, they didn't get involved, and finally Battleborn is going to be gone. That said, Gearbox will be just fine because reportedly Borderlands 3 has sold pretty darn well indeed. And then next, we've got something quite interesting from Xbox. So thanks to Half-Life, people are talking about VR again, but Xbox's head Phil Spencer isn't really one of those people. He actually confirmed that VR is not a focus for the upcoming Project Scarlet console, and he basically was just adamant that customers don't associate virtual reality with the Xbox brand, and that the customers who do want VR, well, they already know where to go get it. Spencer outlined that with Project Scarlet, Microsoft are basically just responding to what their customers are asking for in a console, and that nobody's asking them for VR. That's basically a quote from him. Conversely, though, he said that no company is selling millions and millions of VR units, so there's no real rush there from a money standpoint. And this is kind of interesting because I found it really refreshing that he said that. I mean, I'm a VR advocate. I've loved it basically from day one. And I kind of like that they're not Stadia-ing their way into VR, where it seems like they just don't really have the will internally to do that. Now, that said, there was a little bit of internal will. The Microsoft Flight Simulator team said that VR is a really big thing for them. And frankly, if you have looked at that game, it looks stunning. And I think that in VR would be a pretty incredible experience. But yeah, overall, Microsoft's clawback under Phil Spencer's tenure. It just seems to be that they're listening to customers, they're thinking about their core experience, what they're actually selling to people first, and it seems to actually be going quite well for them. And with that, let's hop on over to a Call of Duty update. So Modern Warfare has actually had its first season detailed, and you know what? Very much unlike any of the Black Ops 4 situations, it sort of seems okay. So there are 6 maps coming, and that includes Crash and Vacant, which of course many of us will remember from COD 4, so that's pretty cool. There's a whole bunch of new game modes, and importantly, the new weapons are on the Battle Pass that's free, right? So you just get them through leveling up during the thing itself. Now, there are some worries that maybe once that Battle Pass ends, they get thrown into loot crates or, something weird like that ends up happening. But right now, there's definitely, I think, cause for caution with that game. But it does seem like they're at least initially following through on what they actually said. But that said, there's also the part of me that's thinking, well, they do have that rumored Battle Royale. Now, what if that is free to play? And that's going to be a far larger, long-term money-making play from them. I've got to imagine something like that is the case. Anyway, next up, with Death Stranding out the door, Hideo Kojima is looking onto his next project, and it's one that might interest me a bit more. He wants to do a horror title, so he took to Twitter to say, as to make the scariest horror game, I'll watch the scary movies to awaken my horror soul. Kojima's love of cinema, pretty well documented, and he cites a Thai film called The Eye, which he watched while making PT. Of course, he was never able to finish PT, very unfortunately, but maybe some of that old PT inspiration will make its way into this new project. Now, look, I'm often a bit critical of Kojima's ham-fisted storytelling, but I will admit this, PT was excellent. So perhaps him maybe getting Guillermo del Toro back on, them working a horror game together, maybe that would be a really good play. And if that is going to be the case, I am absolutely on board. And then finally, let's round it up with 2 quick stories. So, YouTube channel Spawnwave has reported that Resident Evil 3's remaster is in active development over at Capcom, and that's a statement that has then been corroborated by VGC. Now, this does make a whole bunch of sense because upon RE2 Remaster's release in January, they basically said if people were really into it, they'd probably do more. That was a massive success for Capcom, so it makes complete sense that Resident Evil 3 is going to be getting the same treatment. Then finally, WWE. Now, the most recent WWE game has had a number of very funny bugs. They've been playing for you, like, on the screen now, and how was that released? I don't know. It's a little bit wild. Well, here's the funny. The patch that was meant to fix those problems can, on PC, lose your saves. So, whoops. I think this is a cautionary tale in sort of release dates, not pushing something out a bit too early, and, well, quality assurance. Something that does seem to be quite lacking across much of the industry these days. Though that said, not that I'll really blame the developers or the QC people that much. It's probably more down to publisher schedules being pretty darn rigid. Anyway, there you go. That is it for today's episode of The Roundup. Let me know what you thought about these stories down below. And with that, I will see you next time.